diverse voices in the energy revolution. Here's your host, Amy Simpkins.
Hey there, welcome back for another episode of the Power Flow podcast. I am your host, Amy Simpkins, and I'm here today with a very special guest, our first man here on the Power Flow podcast, Dan Wiggins, who is my friend and colleague. We've been working together for several years now, and I'm so excited for this conversation. Let me tell you about Dan. This is Dan Wiggins Jr., a Bad River tribal member and the Mashkezibi Natural Resource Department's air quality technician. He's worked for the tribe for nearly 10 years as the air quality technician and has had oversight of the tribe's renewable energy activities since 2017. He was recently tasked as the project lead for the Ishkonige Nawadide solar microgrid project, which installed over 500 kilowatts of solar and 1,000 kilowatt hours or 1 megawatt hour of batteries at 3 tribal facilities. And I, Amy, was very privileged to work on that project with Dan. The tribe's energy projects are planned and executed on the tribe's ability to exercise energy sovereignty and eventually reach the tribe's energy vision, which is to empower and enable the community to move towards energy independence. Dan, my friend, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me. I'm super excited. As I mentioned before, this is my first real podcast. So I'm very interested on how this is going to come out. I think we're both very, very cool characters. We've both been on the same team together. And I'd say we're probably the ones who brought the most color to our team, which was primarily males. So, I think, it was very interesting.
I can't argue with that. I definitely think you and I both have colorful personalities. And anytime I get to sit down and just have an hour's conversation with you is a good day. So I'm really glad that you're here. And I'm excited today, actually, to hear a little bit more kind of about you personally. And, I know when I met you and we first started talking about what would become Ishkonige Nawadide, you looked out at the empty field at Bad River and you said, there's going to be solar here. And you had such a vision. And that was my first memory of you. And it was so inspiring and it was such a magnetic type of vision. So I'm curious, about your work in air quality and how that led you into being passionate about renewable energy.
Right. That's a great question. I did come from air quality. My current position is the air quality technician still. So I've been using the word dabble. So I'm going to continue to use the word dabble. But I continue to dabble in the air quality field. I do indoor quality work. I work with houses. I work with infrastructure. Very familiar with construction processes and stuff. Very relatable into the field that I'm in. There's obviously 2 tracks of air quality too. So there's the ambient air, then there's the indoor air quality. I come from more of the indoor air quality side. So really working specifically with infrastructure and stuff. But if you go right before when I started in the natural resources, I did go back to school for renewable energy. Just simple applications, simple residential, renewable projects and stuff. So nothing like we might talk about a megawatt solar project in the class, but we were really, really just concentrated on the small projects, the dynamics, kind of some of the technical aspects of, batteries, of solar, of wind, the whole facet. So I did have a little precursor of renewable energy before I got into, even air quality. So when I got into air quality and I started working with houses, one of the aspects that you go on to looking into houses is energy efficiency. It's just by default, just with all of the home assessments and stuff. So I started getting into energy audits, just home assessments. One thing led on to another. And then the tribe approached me and said, hey, would you want to work on a larger renewable energy project on a larger scale? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then they threw me into policy. So I actually helped. So they were like, I was like, yes, we're going to build this big, solar array. You obviously come in with this vision. You see all these solar arrays being put up, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to renewable energy work. I'm going to, my first project, I'm going to put solar panels on something. And lo and behold, they're like, hey, we need these policies pushed through first before you do anything. And it's like, whoa, yeah, I forget that I'm on a government level sometimes. And, technically I work for the tribe. And, part of building projects sometimes is recognizing the gaps that you need within, like a municipality or tribal infrastructure. So those could be legal gaps. Those could be environmental gaps. Those could just be simple gaps of not knowing what's out there. So, there was a lot of questions, a lot of policy stuff that we had to look at. And they made me a part of that at first. Well, whether I was kicking and screaming at first, because I'm not a big paper person or policy person. I really like to get the wheels turning and everything going and get everyone talking about actual projects. So it was really tough at first, but really, really enlightened to me about kind of all the different areas of renewable energy projects. And
Can
that
you
really
give an example? Can you give an example of some of the policy stuff that had to happen first?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that I have led before my big tenure with the Ishkonige Nawadide project was specific ordinances related to pipelines and electrical infrastructure on a large scale. So large transmission lines, large energy pipelines that go through the reservation, and making sure that the tribe has a good grasp of, how they're going to regulate and then how they're going to use those infrastructures, because there is certain pipelines that just go through the reservation and don't necessarily provide a service to the tribe or other municipalities. So I think that all of that stuff got to be put into consideration, and I kind of helped the policies that specifically deal with those two big infrastructures, utilities.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. And kind of a crash course in like how big energy works. How did that experience affect how you view like renewable energy, distributed energy, that sort of thing?
I think it really put a lot of stuff into perspective. I mean, we talked about the national level, national goals, kind of where a lot of initiatives come from. And I think our question was after that, like, how does that get down to the normal person? How do we receive some of those benefits and stuff? Working through those ordinances and stuff, I think highlighted the really bigger picture. You're looking at, how you regulate these pipelines, how you regulate these huge transmission lines. And then you get to see all those different technical areas that deal with the transmission line, how they're laid, how large they are, where they're feeding, what type of, area that they're covering. I mean, especially with electrical infrastructure, we all know MISO and all these other agencies have oversight over that. And I think when you're working through the policy part, it's enlightening and teaching you kind of all of those different facets. And then turning back into a renewable energy project, you're actually, at a pretty good point to where you can carve out a good project within the policies of not only the tribe, but within the policies of, on a federal level. That is important because, the end goals for, a lot of tribes in general, I can't say for municipalities, but I will speak for tribes, the end goal for a lot of tribes is a tribal utility authority, something similar to what those pipelines and what those big transmission lines, what they have. We want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of the generation part, but we also want to consider and be a part of the transmission part. So I think really those policies are really, really opening the doors, identifying the gaps, and really teaching the tribe about what is possible. And then really what not is possible, because there is a lot of oversight, again, that goes over that infrastructure. And even though we do consider ourselves a sovereign nation, once we start getting into those markets and stuff, there's going to be a certain level of oversight. So more or less, it just opens up the door to, the reality of, what that business, because it is a business too, but what that environment is like.
Yeah, I was talking to on episode 6 of a podcast, I talked to Liana Kassar, who is a state level representative, a legislator in the state of Rhode Island, and she was talking about all the different, how holistic of a view she has. Like when she sees energy policy come across her desk, like at the state level, how it has to be balanced with all of the other things. And I think it's such a unique perspective. And I totally relate to what you said that I just want to see projects done. I just want to we joke over here at Microgrid about, having clients who say I got a buddy with an excavator. He can roll it next week. Let's just roll it. I could pour a pad next week, and I'm right there with you. And I think it's healthy for people like us to take a step back and say, no, there's really these overarching issues that we have to at least be aware of, if not actively, engaged in. So that's a really interesting perspective. So tell me a little more about the Ishkonige Nawadide project. Tell me about kind of the genesis of that and, your side of the story.
Oh, my side of the story.
And maybe I guess. So I asked that question as if everyone knows what the project is, because I'm hasn't everyone heard of this great project?
Right. I think it is. It's been my world. It's been your world for the past 2 years. I think if nobody knows about it, they've been under a rock. So
seriously, it's like the biggest battery project in Wisconsin. So exactly. Hello. But for the sake of the people who are just tuning in, tell us a little bit about the project, and then let's talk about kind of the genesis.
Yeah, no, the project, it was a great project, first of all. One of the largest renewable energy projects that the tribe has invested in, partaken in, and executed. But back in 2019, we put a team together that really put an application into the United States Department of Energy. Through that application, we applied for specific microgrids to be applied to 3 different separate buildings in response to a 2016 flooding event. I think we really approached that project with great intentions, not just good intentions, but great intentions, and really was in a response to an event that happened to the tribe into northern Wisconsin. So through all of the emergency planning and stuff, we were able to identify 3 buildings. We were able to identify kind of that we wanted to have a renewable energy and a clean energy approach to provide resiliency for those 3 buildings. So when I say resiliency, one of the issues that we've had during that event was we had specific outages at critical infrastructure. So one at our clinic facility, one at our primary government facility, and then another at our wastewater treatment. So we took those 3 facilities specifically that were affected directly from the flood and said, hey, how can we make these buildings more resilient? When the power goes out, how can we make sure that these buildings and the operations are still going? We all know a wastewater treatment plant. I think that goes without saying, how important that is. Clinic, I think, we can say is just as important as probably the wastewater treatment plant, especially during emergency events. And then the administration building. Obviously, we got to take care of all the government folks. So
I will just say that, I feel like a lot of normal citizens don't actually think that much about their wastewater treatment plant. And,
they don't.
We've worked on a couple now, including the Bad River wastewater treatment plant. And it's actually a really big deal. I mean, there's things that we don't want to think about. We think we want to flush it down and then not think about it again.
Right.
And if those things stop, it's a really big deal.
It is. You can put it on the same parallel line with electrical outages. Well, maybe not on the same parallel thing with electrical outages, but you don't really appreciate electricity until you have an outage and you're sitting in the dark, and then you're like, hey, I wish I had solar panels,
Totally.
Or something of this sort. So, same goes for the water. You're absolutely right. Nobody really appreciates it until you're like, hey, we don't got clean water. What are we going to do? And next thing you know, the tribal government's handing out bottled waters. So it really enlightened us. And then really, back to when the event happened in 2016. Think about, they brought me on in 2017. They really, the tribe really had some specific goals that they wanted to address. And we first addressed it through emergency planning. So we always talk about, policy building and also project execution. Probably the in between of that is strategic planning. So,
which is my favorite part.
Right. It is, it actually is, when you think about the balloons, like when you're in school and you're able to do all these like little balloon charts and stuff on the thing, and the teacher was just like, hey, give me something you like, give me something you like, give me something you like. Strategic planning to me is like that. It's actually the fun part of project planning and development, where you get to take everybody's ideas, throw them in a blender, and you hope something magic comes out. So I think we approach that with both emergency planning, but also our strategic energy planning, which we kind of address, on a regular basis. We try to do it every few years. We've done it specifically for the Ishkonige Nawadide project. A lot of that, even the Ishkonige Nawadide project, was extended from strategic planning, although it was from a specific event. With saying that, we were able to execute the project. And, as you introduced me in the beginning, we were able to install 3 microgrids at 3 facilities, 500 kilowatts of solar with over 1,000 kilowatt hours of battery storage. 2 of the microgrids, the administration building, just addresses the emergency load, but the 2 other microgrids address the entire loads at the facilities. And that was a specific goal of mine. That was not just my goal, but it was a tribal goal, and it was a specific goal that I kind of hung on to. I think, when we look at renewable energy systems, I think a lot of people go into it for financial reasons. They're like, oh, my bill is really high. What's one way I can alleviate my bill and this and that? And we didn't approach that project this way at all. I think my initial goal, the way I approach renewable energy projects, is you got to first do it because it's the right thing to do. So I think that has to be your number one goal in any renewable energy project. Like, why do we want to do this? And if you can't come back to, well, this is the right thing to do for our community, for the municipality, and, for just the environment in general, then I don't know if you should go with the project. I would definitely reconsider, what your options are and, how you're going to approach what your issues are. The second reason, though, we did it, and this was kind of the primary reason, I'll say the first one, but the second one was resiliency. And this threw, I think, you guys off just a little bit, but it definitely threw the contractors off, because they were like, okay, we can do so much better in the financials if you build it like this. If you build it like this, Dan, you can do so much better in the financials. And it was like, well, I just, when the lights go off, I want the system to be able to pick up the load, the entire load. I actually don't, I think I probably said it specifically like this. I don't care about the financials now. At the end of the day, we're going to have to worry about it, and it may come back and bite me. But right now, I care about resiliency. I want to make sure when the outages happen that these buildings are able to operate. So,
I think that, I will say, like you said, it kind of took us by surprise. I think you helped us start creating a new conversation. And by us, I mean, here at Microgrid Analytics, my other company, we were supporting Dan and the Bad River Tribe with trying to figure out what to do. And, you're right. Your observation that so many people want it to be about an economic play. And there's definitely and the reason that we, the vast majority of projects get done on economics is because it's, they got to be paid for somehow. Right. And I mean, full disclosure, like Dan was saying, Bad River won the Department of Energy grant to make this happen, which is how it got paid for. So fundamentally, projects need to get paid for. But I think you helped to open up a new conversation about, what, before we would say, well, here's the economic system here. And then here's how much resilience you get from that system. And you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit because you got it for basically free, right? And it probably wasn't much, but it was something. It was not nothing. And it started a new conversation for us about how we look at resilience even as a separate performance metric from economics. And then if we evaluate them separately, then now how do we come together and balance them based on what a site actually needs? Whether that's Bad River, who says, no kidding, resilience is our most important thing, 100%, versus somewhere else where that may or may not be the case. And I think that's a really important conversation we need to be having industry-wide. So I thank you for starting that.
Yeah, no problem. Because now we're into the economics part of the project.
Totally.
we built these, resilient systems because, barring, a lot of questions behind operations and just knowing the systems, because these are contractors that came in. They are microgrid contractors that came in and, helped us execute the project. There's still a lot of questions, not just, even about the resiliency part with storage and solar and stuff. But I think we fairly did a great job of putting the infrastructure in place. So where we're at now is just really fine tuning, I think, a lot of the operations, how that infrastructure is operated and ran. And, hopefully we can get the best economic scenario out of what we have. And I think that's the way to approach it now. In the beginning, when we were first executing and building, planning and developing, the real goal was definitely around resiliency, and that goes back to the 2016 flood. But you also got to remember, I guess, goals that tribes have in general. Tribes, and I would say not just tribes, but a lot of account holders with utilities. I think one of their wishes, even if they don't say it, is, man, I wish I didn't have to pay this bill, or, man, I wish I could just do my own electricity and not have to deal with the utilities. I think tribes really glamorize that idea and say, hey, let's really take this to the next level. And kind of what I mentioned before, we talk about tribal utility authorities. Let's really dig into what that might look like. Are we generating our own electricity? Are we transporting our own electricity? Are we doing everything? And I think, having these microgrids as kind of a centerpiece and a teaching piece, I think is really valuable. And I all the way around, I'm very happy with how the microgrids were built and executed.
That's awesome. And the operations piece, and obviously Mewgrid is still involved with this, but it's really innovative. From our perspective, looking at many different projects and many different site hosts, so many people talk about wanting to do a microgrid. So many people talk about really wanting to have resilient power. But to put your money and your effort and your labor where your mouth is and actually execute a project, get it in the ground, and then say, no, really, we're operating it, is innovative. There still just aren't that many. Yes, are there more today than there were 5 years ago? Yes, but it's still very nascent. And so going through that, it certainly is still a creative process to be working on the operations piece and say, how does this work? And it worked well on paper. Now, how does it work in reality?
Absolutely. And you kind of hit it on the head. I think we surprised the contractors when we said that we would want to operate it. And I think they kind of took that as, they probably want to own it. And then I think through conversations, they're like, oh, Dan's really talking about he wants to push the buttons. And I was like, well, yeah, I want to push the buttons. We just built these glamorous systems. Part of that, the other part of building these renewable energy systems is building workforce development among our tribal people. So we got to look at everything, and the operation piece is a great piece to understand, but also take control of, because we do want to have our own tribal utility authority. We want to be able to run those systems as we want them ran, and then make sure that we're benefiting the tribal community as much as possible. And one of those things is putting tribal members in those positions to hopefully operate those someday. Those might be a little ways down the road because those are highly technical positions. I think you said it. There's one project where you can just go put solar panels in a field, and it's really relatively low maintenance, hands off. You probably really don't even have to pay attention to it in some circumstances. Where I think once we added batteries and you kind of look at the operation strategy part, there is an opportunity to kind of build jobs, build workforce development, build education within the tribal community. And, sometimes some people will say, oh, you want them to specifically work with that microgrid. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But I also want them just to see it and experience. And then maybe they just get a taste of it and say, hey, I want to go do my own business somewhere else. Those are cool. We're just giving people visuals to experience and to learn from. And yeah, excited all the way around.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk more with Dan about visions for the future. Don't miss it. Power Flow podcast. Today, my guest is my friend and colleague, Daniel Wiggins of the Bad River Band. They're on the shores of Lake Superior up in northern Wisconsin and have just executed 3 amazing microgrids on tribal lands. Before we go to visions for the future, though, I wanted to talk, you were talking about, visualizing it. You were talking about inspiring the community. And I just want to ask you, when you stand in front of that kiosk in the clinic, or if you log in and look at the data, and you see that solar come up and you see the grid purchase go down, tell me what that feels like for you.
Oh, that, I think the kiosk, I think you hit it on the head. When we first seen the kiosk and we went in, how is the kiosk going to look? Whatever parameters are we going to show? And we gave them specific parameters. And then we put it in the clinic and we got everything finally up, and then we plugged it in. And then I think it was me and a couple other colleagues from the tribe went and looked at it with the contractors. But you're right. It's just an amazing feeling. But we were able to visually see, what each microgrid was doing at each of the sites. And it honestly brought a tingling feeling. It gives you goosebumps, I think. One, because I was such a part of the project from the start to the end. So, I think I had a lot of passion and heart put into it. I really feel that way. So, when I was able to see the kiosk, that was kind of one of the final actions that the contractors had to do. And it was like, oh my God, they're working.
It's real.
The other tingle was when Travis was able to provide me the actual data, and Travis showed me that they were actually working. That was the other time I actually got the tingling feeling, because I was like, all right, I'm just not seeing a picture on a TV, because we can manipulate a kiosk. But what the review and behind the scenes, when they looked at the data and Travis was able to say, hey, Dan, they're working, man. They're working. And I think you could even hear it through the message when Travis sent. I think he was even excited. He probably had a little bit of goosebumps. And I think, I say Travis, your husband, but he
and business partner.
I think he's even surprised at how these systems have came out. I think because we were in the beginning parts of building this, Microgrid specifically, I think Microgrid has a specific role in making sure how these were designed. So Travis and yourself and Microgrid in general, definitely you guys had a piece of your heart and stuff put into the project. So I think we scrutinize these contractors up and down. I don't know if these contractors have ever seen a technical team built like what Bad River built. We had myself, we had Bill Bailey, we had Niels Walter, we had Microgrid, who you guys come with yourself, Travis, and Mike. I mean, we came with almost every facet of, the renewable energy industry, and said, hey, we're going to watch you guys build this. We want to know how you're building it. We want to know how you're planning to build it. We want to see all your prep drawings, your pre-drawings, your post drawings. We want to see everything. And I think, that shocked them. It really did. And it taught them something else, I think, about, how some projects should be approached. And I think the project absolutely benefited from it.
Totally. Before I want to shift gears here in a second, but No, you really built a team, and you really made sure that you were prepared going into the project. Like, this wasn't some fly by night. I mean, it started as a spark of inspiration, but then you built the knowledge base that you needed, to make the project happen. So yeah, totally. It was an incredible team, and it was an incredible team to work with as well. Just great people. So, but let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk a little bit more about vision. So you've talked a little bit about, the tribal vision. I'd love to, well, the first thing I'd like to do is to dig a little bit deeper into like energy sovereignty and why that's important, at the tribal level as a sovereign nation.
Well, tribes, the simpler response to that is because we can, and
Love it.
some people don't like that answer, but it's an answer that we can provide. We are a sovereign nation. We do want to empower and enable our community to move towards energy independence. What that vision looks like, because energy independence is a huge statement. I told you I was in policy, I was in pipeline and transmission infrastructure policy. That enlightens you about the holistic environment out there, and kind of what it would take to reach that energy independence. So, with saying that, I think like when we approach these renewable energy projects, there has to be a connectivity thing with each project, especially the large scale projects. So I think the end goal is, I'll always lean towards tribal government and say it's what they want, which sometimes we'll never know because it changes every couple of years or every, as they rotate in and out. But I think in essence, every government's goal is to have a certain level of energy independence and a say in how that energy is, moved throughout their communities, whether it's generated or transmitted. How that can be accomplished, is another question, because we can get into the ownership parts that the tribe wants to own everything, or maybe the tribe doesn't want to own everything. Maybe we just want to make sure that we can regulate things enough so that we have control over what is happening on our reservation and how things are being distributed to our people. Lots of times tribes are put in places where they're kind of on the exteriors of these big centerpieces for energy industry. So we all know that cities are usually very, they're very straightforward about how policy and how the utilities and stuff work. But as you get into the outskirts, you'll get into co-ops, you'll get into, all these different utilities that have their own regulations, their own policies. Some are for the better and some are for the worse. But you're kind of up in arms, or I shouldn't say up in arms, but you're kind of, you're at the whims of the utilities, more or less. And I think what the tribe looks to do is put more of our needs and our wants into some of those utilities, but also look at developing our own utilities.
Yeah. So something you use the word holistic, which of course it's one of my favorite words in general, but it is certainly something that every time I've been able to interact with the tribe, specifically with, tribal council and the way government is done and the way the thought process has happened around developing energy strategy, developing strategy specifically for these projects and more generally towards energy sovereignty for the tribe. I'm struck by the indigenous mindset, which is extremely holistic. And it's holistic not just between all the things that a normal government has to balance of public health and infrastructure and energy and all of the things, but also a holistic view of protecting land, protecting water, protecting wildlife, protecting people. And so I'm really excited to ask you this question, which I ask every guest, which is, from your chair and from what you have seen, both as, a tribal member and as an energy leader, what do you see as the biggest challenges standing between us as a whole human society and our clean energy future?
Oh, I actually remember this question, and I had to, it's ourselves. It really is. When it comes down to it, it's really you got, and this is kind of one of those things where I don't want to be like a counselor or anything, but we all got to really look within. So that's a little scary saying, because that's something my counselor would probably say to me. But look at how we're living. Honestly, I mean, if everybody goes home and looks at all of their electronics and stuff, 10 years ago, I would say that there was a norm going around where energy efficiency was super big. And I think people were getting all of these energy saving appliances, devices. We're limited in how much electricity we use. And I think the initiatives was make sure you turn your lights off and stuff when you walk out the door. There's all these energy efficiency initiatives. I think we've totally moved away from that. And I think technology is really outpacing kind of everything else, where people feel like they need a piece of technology in every single room. They need a TV in every single room. They need Google speakers here and there. They need telephones. They need, so, in essence, to make renewable energy and kind of the energy world work, we have to get back into the first part of it, which is energy efficiency. I think a lot of us have just overlooked that initial piece, making sure buildings are energy efficiency, as much as possible, but making sure our lives are built around, reducing energy usage, and, not necessarily going out just to, have as much technology plugged into one room as possible. Those are definitely the start. And I think, once we start doing that, I think a lot of the technology places will fall into place. I think, once you make a home or a building super energy efficiency, trust me, you can get a system that is much cheaper and much capable of, supporting the needs that you're probably going to want and need. The other thing, though, that I will say is just the utility. This is a dangerous thing to say, but the utilities that exist now really have a grasp and an upper hand on new development, new infrastructure, and anything that will be tied into that existing infrastructure. Whether it's just a large renewable energy project, or whether you're considering a tribal utility authority. The utilities around you are going to try to influence, are going to try to steer you into the direction that they want you to go. And that's even building the project. And one I will say is, they really wanted, the utilities that we have here, really wanted a buy all sell all system, meaning they wanted us to just produce as much solar as we could do and use the batteries as much as we can and sell it back to them for, cents. In essence, that doesn't reach any of our goals. Again, we did not approach this from an economic standpoint or anything. So I think, we kind of just listened to them and we said, we're going to go with the resiliency goals. We want to make sure these systems are resilient. We don't think we can do a buy out sell out program while, building these resilient systems. So they respected our decisions, but in essence, I think they still had a lot of questions about how we were developing. I think they were thinking already, what is after this? If they're doing this now and they're building these huge microgrids and they're really, I don't want to say we blew up their policy, but they had only 1 megawatt to invest into a buy all sell out program, and we put in a megawatt of batteries and a half a megawatt of solar. So in essence, I think they had to respond to what the tribe was doing and say, hey, you know what, maybe a megawatt buy all sell out program isn't necessarily enough, and we got to look at how a lot of these policies are working with renewable and infrastructure. So our utility responded rather well, I would say, and they were very respectful. But I would say in a lot of other cases that I hear, the utilities are the hardest part on getting renewable infrastructure put in. And that's across the board. I can go to municipalities, I can go to tribes, probably on a federal level. I bet you there's government agencies that have a hard time putting in renewable infrastructure because the utilities, those, put up barriers. So, yeah,
I think, if I were gonna not play devil's advocate, but if I were just gonna, like, in their defense, say, utilities have spent 100 years or more of not being paid much attention to until the lights go off, right? Of people not really being interested in how they do what they do. And there's this whole level, and this is what I'm finding, like, as I talk more about what we do in the industry, what we do specifically at Microgrid with kind of normal regular consumers, there's a non-understanding out there of what the utilities do, because for years and years and years, and it's not that they're hiding anything or they meant to be hiding anything, it's that people literally didn't really care. As long as they could walk in the room and flip the light switch and the lights came on, well, that's fine. And if it didn't, then they gave the angry phone call, right? And all of a sudden, we have entities from individual homeowners to large companies to sovereign nations and tribal customers who are coming and saying, hey, we're interested in what you do, how you do it, and we want to tell you how to change it. Like, it's a huge paradigm shift. So I think you have a really great point that, like, that's the heart of the paradigm shift. And I think it gets back to what you were originally saying in talking about energy efficiency, that it's about looking inside. We have to decide as individual consumers and then as groups of consumers, who are whether that's as part of a company or a municipality or a tribe, how do we want to engage? Like, I think we're all starting to wake up and realize that it's not enough just to turn the light on whenever we please, or plug in a large piece of equipment whenever we please, that we should actually think a little bit harder about when we're doing it and why, and if it makes sense right now. And it feels like we're all just waking up from a long sleep. and maybe the utilities are too, that, like, they've been entrenched for so long and now all of a sudden these people who are waking up are saying, let's all do this differently together. And they're like, together? What does that even mean? How does that look? Yeah.
No, you're right on. And I think, like I said before, Bad River was in a fortunate part where we were able to work with the utility that is somewhat understanding. They did approach us with a weird buy all sell all, but at the end of the day, they were very acceptable of what we did. And I think through that relationship, you also said it is we were enlightened about kind of, the infrastructure that they have and kind of the restrictions that not necessarily that they're trying to put on us, but that are reality. So, we always think, well, they don't want us to do it because they don't want us to be independent. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes they don't want us to do it because it's might mess up their infrastructure and their transmission and, all these other, intricate parts of what they have built. And you're absolutely right. Not a lot of people really even care about the utility until there's an outage. And then that's when everybody cares. That's when people are on Facebook saying whose power is out, all of that. So, absolutely. The utilities do get a hard time, I think, for all the wrong reasons. However, I think a lot of utilities, it still is a business for them. Again, fortunate, we have a co-op, so they would get offended if I said this, but it still is a business. They still have overhead. They still have to meet certain financial needs and stuff, and that's the other part of it. And that's where they also get a bad rap, is a lot of utilities, their rates and stuff are built upon that overhead. And, if they were just more transparent about sharing some of that information, I think a lot of the consumers and stuff would just buy in.
So earlier you literally said, because I wrote it down because I thought it was a great statement, the number one goal should be to, make sure that it's the right thing, to do the right thing. And, like, we've been playing with the phrase around here of, like, what's the next right thing, especially, like, as we develop this podcast, my partner in the podcast, Laura, and I have said, like, what's the next right thing to get these messages out? Glennon Doyle's podcast, we can do hard things. Like she has a whole segment at the end that's called the next right thing. And so that's sort of my question is like, again, from your chair, and I'm looking at it. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time talking about the tribe's vision, but also like as an industry, like where do we need to go next? What are the next right things for us as a national level community, as a global community, to move the clean energy transition forward? You talked a little bit about a few of those things with the challenges, but let's dream a little bit.
That's a great question. The next step is really for municipalities to strategically, and this is probably a political answer, and I don't want to give you a political answer, but the next step is for municipalities, for people to really look at what their profile is and really apply what's available to them where they live. I think everybody has an energy profile that's specific to them. And I think one of the best thing to do for everybody, if I said, hey, if everybody said, Dan, we want to do renewable energy projects and we want to do them, the best way and the right way, I would say, get a work group together with your community members and develop a strategic way to accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish. Everybody has an energy profile. We're not going to use wind up here for multiple reasons because we don't have a wind resource. We don't want to use coal because we want to be clean energy. All of those certain things need to be identified. So what is the next right thing to do? The next right thing to do is probably to ask the community what they want, first of all, and then kind of respond accordingly. We all answer to somebody, whether it's leadership, whether it's our children, or whether it's the community we reside in. And I think really listening to all of those resources and people, I think is the right thing to do. It is really easy for people like me and you to build projects. I don't want to underscore anything that we've done, but me and you and the group, we could build a project within a couple weeks and it would be extravagant. It really would be. But is it something we could put into Bad River and say, hey, you know what, Bad River, this is going to benefit you 100%. You're not only going to be resilient, you're going to produce the best financials ever. We don't know some of those questions, and understanding kind of what the community needs and then kind of what they want as well is very important. And I think that'll keep you online and kind of what's the right thing to do, because there is two facets, especially when you work for a tribal government or a municipality. I think there's the residential sector, and then there's kind of the government sector where you're dealing with specific infrastructure for the government. And that's where we're at now, where we're tackling some of the huge infrastructure pieces that the government needs to sustain during emergencies and just throughout the future. But what about the residential sector now? So when the power goes out, their power still goes out. And that is a complaint. That's a relevant complaint because we still get outages. We still have the same utilities. So our next right thing to do is really addressing the residential sector and somehow providing avenues to renewable energy projects that make sense. There are so many contractors out there that will sell you a system just because it's a system and they can install it. Not because it's the best system, though. So, strategically approaching the residential sector, I think, is really important. Getting the right contractors into the area and making sure that those contractors understand the visions and the goals of kind of the community at hand. And when you do it, then you kind of listen to people and you listen to your neighbors and you listen to your friends and, Indigenous people, we have this seventh generation teaching. This seventh generation teaching specifically relates to our children who come after us, and that we just rent this world we're in right now, and we rent this for our children tomorrow. So we got to take care of it. We got to make sure what we leave here for them is beneficial to them and benefits them. So again, that idea just keeps in mind, that there's a whole nother generation, a whole nother community that you're hoping to accomplish things for and, get them a little closer to their goals.
When a technical guy and a project guy wants to give you a political answer, which I don't think it was political, but I take your meaning that it was more about policy and it was more about conversation than doing projects. Like, you got to pay attention, right? When your guy who wants to do projects is like, no, we need to stop and have a conversation first. But I love of course you're speaking my language. I love that the bringing the community together and really being clear about what the goals are before hauling off and trying to do something just because it's there, making sure that it is the next right thing. So I think that's a powerful statement. And, one of the values that we really hold dear here at PowerFlow is creating collaborative conversation, collaborative ideation that leads to collaborative innovation. And the key word, of course, there is collaborative. Like, you can't do this in a vacuum. Like, you have to do it with your community, with your neighbors, with your brothers and sisters, to make it happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But on that, though, I'll just extend. We also got to open up, though. I mean, we got to talk amongst each other, but we also got to open up to people like you, Microgrids and Niels Walter, and even Faith Technology, the contractors that installed it. We have to be open to discussions even outside of our group and bringing in the right technical expertise and stuff. So, with all of that plan, and make sure that we just bring the right people into the conversation. And I think, we've kind of been approaching a lot of the projects that way. So there's not necessarily, I don't think there's ever a specific technology or a specific project that's ever going to say, hey, what is the next best thing for your community? It's usually a collaboration of things. Even with the Ishkonige Nawadide project, we were able to build 3 microgrids, but the biggest thing one of the other things that we were able to bring into the community was Microgrid. Microgrid is going to continue to help us with our strategic planning, our strategic goals, and identifying those goals and stuff, specifically through, technical feasibility study. Again, we don't even really know. We could take our technical group back and the tribe could say, hey, we want this building off the grid and we want solar panels, and we could accomplish that for them. Absolutely. I have full faith in our team. But we're doing it the right way. We're going back to what is feasible, what is technically feasible, and what are the gaps. And so, I really appreciate our working group and kind of, our ability to humble ourselves and go back and say, hey, we need to go back and strategically look at what are our next steps. And those are the right things to do before you start implementing big, huge, multi-million-dollar projects that kind of stay in the ground for a while.
Yeah, seriously. No, I love the iteration between, the vision and the conversation, and then checking back with the data, making sure that the data is behind the decision, is supporting the decision. And it's got to be an iteration between those two things, right? The community conversation, technically what is feasible, what does the data say, and making sure all of those things are in sync. So absolutely. That's how you get it done. And you have got it done.
Thank you. We got it done. We got it done.
All right. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. And, as we said at the beginning, it's the kind of conversation I could have all day. So it's been really delightful as always.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, absolutely. We can definitely talk again. I think we could talk forever about energy. We could talk about our family. We could go on for hours. So we'll save that for the next podcast, maybe.
Sounds beautiful. If a listener wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to contact me is at air1, AIR, the number 1, at badriver-nsn.gov.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom, and let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy. This was fun. Let's definitely do it again.
All right. This has been another episode of the PowerFlow podcast. Listeners, we are so grateful for your time that you've spent today with us, and we hope to see you next time here at the whiteboard.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the PowerFlow podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share the episode with other innovators, leave us a positive review, and subscribe to PowerFlow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find show notes for this episode, more great conversations, PowerFlow merchandise, and more at powerflowpodcast.com. PowerFlow is hosted by Amy Simpkins, produced by Devin Shonchuk, and managed by Laura Novak. See you next time here at the whiteboard.